Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. I have a curriculum review to share with you today for the material that we use for our American History unit for the American Revolution time period. Now the first thing I want to share with you is this CD called Colonial America, and that's the music that you're listening to right now. Absolutely love these songs. We listen to it throughout our whole entire unit, and this is probably my most favorite thing that we got from any of our history units. Now throughout this video, I want to share with you audio samples from these other CDs as well. We have 3 CDs by Jonathan Sprout, and he takes historical events and sets them to music. We also have Thomas Jefferson's America. This is by Jim Weiss, and he is a narrator that my family has really enjoyed over the years. And then the last CD is History Songs by Audio Memory, and these are history songs from different time periods. Now at the end of this video, I want to share with you my son's main lesson book so that you can see the work that he did for this unit. The first thing I want to show you is the Professor Noggins game for American Revolution. This is a card game that has 2 sets of questions, an easy set and a hard set. And we found this one a little bit more challenging to do at the beginning of the unit, but it did get easier as we progressed through this unit. And then the back of the cards have these illustrations for the time period, which are really nice. All right, the next books are some of my favorite. They are by Betsy and Julio Maestro, and we have 2 of them here, Struggle for the Continent and Liberty or Death. And we picked these up a little bit later in the unit because we had read a book by Betsy Maestro in our Colonial Times Unit study. We liked it so much that we went searching for the other ones in this series, and we were not disappointed. These are some of my favorite. We really enjoy them. They have beautiful illustrations, and it's written in a really engaging manner, almost like a page turner. So if you had a child who wasn't that interested in history, this might change his mind because it is written in a lively manner. You wouldn't even know that it's a history book. And same with this one. This is part of a series called the American Story Series. And these ones have a bit more content, even though they have beautiful illustrations. You might find other books by Betsy Maestro that are more like picture books where they have the same beautiful illustrations, but they have a little bit less content. So overall, we really enjoyed both of these books, and the illustrations provided inspiration for our own illustrations in my son's main lesson books. The next book I want to share with you is by Scholastic, and it's You Wouldn't Want to Be at the Boston Tea Party. And there's a whole series of books like this, and they all have the same kind of silly, whimsical illustrations that at first kind of threw me off because I didn't take the book as seriously, but it turns out that the content is really well done. It's very well written, and it's very informative in a really simple manner. So we've really enjoyed these books. The next one I have is by David Adler, and this is another one of my favorite authors. And this is a picture book, and what sometimes can also throw you off about picture books is that you think they're just for like really young children. But what I love about picture books is that usually you get amazing content written in a manner that's really easy to understand for all age groups. And then the biggest perk, in my opinion, are the illustrations, which I really, really enjoy. The next book is called Paul Revere's Ride, and this is the poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And I know that the first lines are pretty familiar to a lot of people, but then I had never read the poem all the way through. And my kids didn't find this book quite as interesting because it's a whole poem, which made it a little bit less of an engaging book. But the illustrations are fantastic. They're like works of art throughout the whole entire book. So I really appreciate the art of this book. The next book I want to share with you is The Boston Tea Party. And this is another book that's really nicely illustrated. We didn't really enjoy this book too much. It's kind of written in a different manner. I don't actually know the style exactly. But it starts out with one sentence, and then as you go through the book, the same sentence is repeated along with a new sentence and, of course, a new illustration. And then again, all 3 sentences are written, or rather the first 2 and then a third. So it kind of is a building book. And by the time you get to the very last page, then you get like the entire review of the whole entire story. And my kids found this a little bit repetitive and not that interesting. But again, like for me, the illustrations were really beautiful. So it's not a book that I would read more than once. However, what I think would be a really good option for this book, if you had it, just retell your own story based on the pictures and with your understanding of the Boston Tea Party. And then at the end, there is a nice little timeline that goes through some of the important events. Okay, so those were some of my favorite. Now I do have more books to show you, but before I show you the other books, I want to share with you some of the historical fiction that my kids read. Now for these books, I mostly have their impressions of the book, not so much my impression of the book since I didn't read through them. So Carry On, Mr. Bowditch was a book that I wanted to assign both my 9th grader and my 5th grader. Now my 5th grader hasn't read this one yet, but my 9th grader read it and he liked it. He said it was sad, but he still liked it, and that's as much as I got out of him. Now granted, he read this at the beginning of the year. This was about 4 months ago, so maybe had I asked him then, I would have gotten a little bit more details about it. But I think this book would be suitable for anywhere from 5th through high school probably. Then we have My Brother Sam Is Dead, and this again was a book that I wanted both my 5th grader and my 9th grader to read, but so far only my 9th grader has read it, and he also said this book was pretty sad. But I do still intend my 5th grader to read this one, but he's gotten distracted by other books, which is fine. So this would also make a great historical fiction for an American History Unit. The World of William Penn. Now, I got this book because I absolutely love the books by Foster. We've gotten, I'm going to show you one later on for this review, but we've gotten, I think, almost her entire series because we started reading one of them, loved it so much, and then we got the rest of them. So because this was a smaller book and it was just on one person, well, actually, they're all on one person, but it's all world history. Actually, I should say. And since I didn't read this one, but I read the other ones, I'm assuming this is the same format, only, a smaller book. But basically, it goes through the entire life of whoever it's being written about. So this one is William Penn. We also have Captain John Smith, and then a couple other ones. And then it goes through their whole entire life and what's happening in the world at that time. So this is a little bit difficult in the sense that it's world history, but it's told through the whole life of one person. So it keeps coming back to that one person and talking about that person's life. And at the same time, then the chapters kind of go off into tangents and talk about what's going on in world history at the time. Now, my son read about half the book before he just wasn't interested in it anymore. And I like these books by Foster so much that I plan just to read this one aloud to him. The reason why I didn't read this one aloud to him at the time was that I had actually so many other books that I was reading to him. I simply ran out of time and I just assigned this one to him. The Fighting Ground, this was a book that my 5th grader read. I think this would probably be 4th, 5th, or 6th grade level. And this is historical fiction. So this is American Revolution time period. And he enjoyed it, but he didn't find it like super captivating, but still like an easy read for him. Didn't take him long at all. He did, however, really like this book. It's called The Battle of Bunker Hill, and it's one of those books where you've got 3 different stories and lots of choices and many different endings, and so you can kind of choose a path and then find out what's going to happen, and then you can go back and reread other paths. So he really enjoyed this kind of book, and so I'm going to look for other ones that are in the same kind of format. This book, Fever 1793, I saw this book being suggested on Emily's channel at ARG Schooling, and I picked it up for my son, and he read this like in 2 days. It was such a fast read, and so when he reads a book that fast, then for me, that means that it was a good book. And so this is, again, American Revolution time period. And really interesting novel. I look forward to reading this myself, but this was a book that I assigned to him. I didn't intend to read it aloud, but if I get a chance, then I certainly want to read it. Ariel Bradley, my son thought it was okay. This is a really simple book, probably 3rd, 4th, 5th grade level, and I had assigned it to my 5th grader. He read it in a couple of days. He thought it was okay, not fantastic, but it's still like a nicely written and nicely illustrated book. Really simple. Sam the Minuteman and George the Drummer Boy are super easy books. Well, he's in 5th grade, so super easy for him. This might be like, say, 2nd grade level, possibly. Has some illustrations, really simple story. He read this in 20 minutes. I happen to have them in my homeschool library, and that's why I gave them to him, but this this wouldn't, if you're putting together a unit for a 5th grader, this might not be something that you pull out for a 5th grader, but because I happen to have it, I went ahead and added it to our unit. And then the other thing is that I thought, well, maybe he'll read it to my kindergartner, but he didn't. He just read them to himself. And then the other book I have is Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And my 9th grader read this one, but my 5th grader didn't. And my 9th grader, he read this, and then as he was going through his other American history material, it would refer back to this book, and then he was kind of delighted that he had already read this book and had context for it later on in his history unit. So that was good for him. All right, so the following books are the ones that some of them we don't like and some of them we love. A More Perfect Union is also by Betsy Maestro, and it's the same kind of books that we've really enjoyed throughout our history units. We actually didn't get to this one yet, but I thought I'd show it to you anyway. It's still part of this unit, but we just kind of ran out of time, and we had to move on to a new unit. So we'll probably revisit this book next year when we pick up our history units. The ones that we didn't finish, we'll pick them up next year and just continue with them. The American Revolution Q&A, we didn't use this book at all. I had originally intended to use it with my 9th grader, and we didn't use it with him at all either. But what's nice about this book is that if you were doing a unit study for history and you needed to come up with some questions, then this has the question and the answer. And so that kind of it would be helpful if you're trying to come up with some questions for a student. So I think this is probably junior high and up. American Revolution, this is History Pockets, and I got this one so that we could kind of get some inspiration for our own projects out of this. But even if you didn't make your own projects, you could still, the book itself has the material for you to do the projects. And I think that's really great. If you weren't a project-oriented, hands-on kind of homeschooler, then this would be a great way to have a couple of those things without having to go overboard with a lot of supplies. The next 2 books I want to share with you are some of my favorites. They are by Genevieve Foster, and we actually didn't get to the world of George Washington because we were still reading the world of Captain John Smith. And it's actually this book that inspired me to get the rest of the books in the series because we liked it so much. So this one is, again, more of like a world history, and it goes through the entire life of Captain John Smith, and at the same time, it is talking about what's going on in the world at the time. Now, it was suggested by Sherry over at Homeschooling on a Wing and a Prayer. When she did this book, what she would do is just go through and pick the different chapters that worked with the unit that they were doing rather than reading the whole book, which I think is a really great option because when you're reading the whole thing cover to cover, it's just so much information. And we were trying to do this in, within 1 or 2 units, so maybe between 2 and 3 months. And that wasn't it. I mean, this is, you could read it if you were reading like 20 or 30 pages every few days, you could finish the book, but it was so much information, we couldn't finish the whole book, which meant that we couldn't get into the world of George Washington. So in the future, I might choose this as my only read aloud, or I might just pick the chapters that we need. What I didn't know at the time when we were reading this book and we wanted it for our colonial unit, or rather like the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, and Plymouth Rock, that time period, what I didn't realize was that since it goes through the Captain John Smith's whole life, it starts at his birth, and it starts in Europe, and it starts with information that was so like early on in the history that we wanted to do that it really just, at first it didn't seem like it had context, but actually it had really good context for understanding why the Pilgrims came to America in the first place. But at the time it was just too broad for my children. So moving forward, I probably would have jumped ahead in the book to the time period that we actually wanted rather than going to the birth of John Smith and then working through. The next things I want to show you are these workbooks called The Story of the USA. They go from the explorers and the settlers all the way up to modern America. And I don't have any of these to show you because my son has completed all of them, but I did pull a set from the last book that he wasn't done with yet so I can show you. And they're for each chapter, and I assigned 1 chapter every day. It's just a few pages. It has some text to read, and then some questions to answer. And there's a variety of questions, true and false, and then fill in the blank, and then, some word choices. And then it has some really simple illustrations and some vocabulary at the beginning. So at the beginning of this, he really enjoyed them, and he was doing them diligently. And you can see now for this one, I think he only answered one question, and that was it. And so he'll go back and finish this, or I'll say, don't worry about it. He's done a lot of other work anyway, and we hadn't gotten up to this time period of American history. But when it comes to workbooks, since we don't have a lot of them, when we do have them as part of our unit, then at first it's a novelty and it's kind of fun, but then it starts to get repetitive and boring, and then it loses its appeal very quickly. Okay, so the next book is Where Was Patrick Henry? And my son read this one and he wasn't that impressed. He didn't like it that much. So this might be a good book to read aloud to your child. With so many really engaging historical fiction, then it can be kind of a letdown when you're reading something like this that's not written in such an engaging manner, although I think the content is still pretty good. So this would be a great book to pick out from the library. Battles of the French and Indian War. We so did not like this book. I think it's amazing in the sense that it covers the details of the French and Indian War too much. It has all the battles and the amount of people in each of the armies and where the battles took place and how far away from the locations they were, and all way too much information. So great if you're a serious history buff and you want something really specific about this time period. Not so great if you're just trying to read it and get a general understanding, and then you get bogged down by way too many details and way too much information. So if I were to do this in the future and I still want to use this same book, what I would do is read the section ahead of time and then summarize orally for my child so that we could understand the point without being lost in all the details. Because after a while, when you're hearing the numbers of the armies and the casualties and who was in charge and the distances between the two locations where things were taking place, you can easily just forget which battle was which and who was winning and who was losing. And so this book ended up being kind of a struggle. We did finish this book. I read it aloud to him. We did find some inspiration for some of his drawings in his main lesson book from some of the illustrations in this book, but it's not something that I would have chosen to begin with. However, I don't think, I had any other books in our collection for this unit, specifically on the French and Indian War. So for that, it was useful to have this book. Phoebe the Spy was a book that my son read. He thought it was okay, not super great, but this would be a really great book for maybe 4th grade level, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade level. And he read it in less than a day. Great Colonial American Projects. I had this with my previous unit. It kind of trailed into this unit as well. We got a lot of really great inspiration for projects that we did inspired by this book. And of course, you can check the playlist for all of the things that we did. But also as an activity book, it's really great because the content for each chapter is really nicely done, really well written, very specific and not too broad. So you get a nice overview of colonial times as well as some nice illustrations and some really great simple projects to do. The last book we didn't get to at all, and I'm okay with not getting to this book because I wasn't really thrilled with this book to begin with. We've read other ones in this series. I think we did one on the Silk Road, possibly, and what I found was that it was too broad. So I can't speak specifically about this book, but I'll speak about the other ones in this series and why I wasn't so keen on getting to this book. But what I found was that the information was a little bit too broad for us to really understand it. So for somebody who's just being introduced to this time period, this may not be the best book. I think sometimes simpler books with general overviews kind of help you capture what's going on, and then you can go into more details where you find your interest or where you need it for specific reasons. Now, the book, when I started to read this book, I kind of browsed through it to begin with. I can just tell you that it wasn't written in that engaging of a manner. So this might be one of those boring history books, in quotations, that you're like, oh, I have to like struggle to get through. But because there are so many books out there that are written in an engaging manner and that are interesting, then I don't feel like you have to struggle through material that you're not going to like. However, this might be the perfect material for you. You might really like this book. So I still wanted to show you it, even though I can't give you a proper review on it, because it was something that was in my collection. It's not something that I purchased. It was something that was handed down to me. And so it was in my collection to add to this unit. All right, so I think that about wraps up the material for this unit. There are only two really quick things that I want to show you. Heroes of America I thought was an audio CD. It's actually not. You have to go on the computer and then you look at all the files and it's like a ton of different books. We didn't use this one at all. And then way back in history, this is a board game that is trivia based. So it's best to do this when you have covered the time periods that are on this board game. Otherwise, you'll struggle through this game quite a bit. All right, so now it's time to show you my son's main lesson book. Now, although we have a main lesson book, we did not approach this unit in a typical Waldorf manner, but I still want to show you the drawings that he did. This particular main lesson book covers from the exploration, a little bit on the exploration through to American Revolution, and we had taken our history units and divide them up into smaller units. So this covers about 3 different units, and he almost completed this book, and so we'll stop here. And since we didn't get through all of our history units, we're going to pick them back up again next year in the winter. So for the illustrations in the beginning, a lot of these were from chalk drawings that I did on the chalkboard, and then for some of these other ones, he got inspiration from the books that he was reading and then just copied out the pictures from the books, and then he would write something that complemented the pictures and the readings that we had done. So we used a lot of the drawings from Betsy Maestro's books, the ones that I showed you at the beginning that we really enjoyed. And then he just got really into drawing his own things, but then at the end you can tell he got a little bit hasty and wasn't as interested in it. As with all things, there's a novelty in the beginning that really makes things interesting. By the time you get to the end, it's just not so interesting anymore. So he just needs to do a little bit of writing here on the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and then he has, I think, 1.5 pages left, which we'll probably just leave unless there's something that he really wants to do, and then again we'll pick it up next year. So at this time, I want to share with you some of the audio clips for the CDs that we enjoyed during this unit. Of course, nothing compares to Colonial America. This is by far our favorite out of all of them. And don't forget that you can check the description box below for a link to the playlist for this unit as well as other units so that you can see all the projects and activities that we do for our unit studies.
Where the sand dunes seemed to stretch to the sky, there were 2 men at the turn of the century, determined to learn how to fly on a cold. Hard work, clear vision, a stubborn refusal to fail. Flight broke, but not broken. How does a dream prevail? Hero, looking for a hero, someone to look up to every day.
Thomas Jefferson turned his horse toward the oak trees halfway up the mountainside. He smiled when he saw that some of his grandchildren had come down from the house at the top of the mountain and were there waiting for him. The littlest ones ran forward, calling, "Grandfather," as he dismounted and dropped his rein.
Columbus thought he'd find China and much more. Instead, an island he named